sure.
Well, you just didn't see them because they're parked a block away. You had to walk a whole block to get here. Oh, wait, I gotta be up here.
Is anybody going to the groundbreaking tomorrow for Northway Housing Alternatives?
Yes.
I can't.
I'm hoping to get back from CCBA in time. I'm going to have to leave there early, but
I was going to try.
so if I don't make it, it's because of traffic. So I have to come from Tualatin.
I was going to go to the...
Or well, actually Lake Oswego, the other side.
There was going to be...
We get new mugs.
Yeah, really nice.
Yeah.
Is that to take home or to drink our water here out of?
Those are,
That's for
I
our-
felt bad having paper cups,
for
so
our
they
water
have
here,
transitioned
isn't it?
permanently.
Good idea.
That's all right. I'll still take it home. They don't want it after I
And we
use
can
it.
all put them in the dishwasher on our way out tonight, so.
You figured it's about as easy as it gets.
Yeah.
It's 8 cups.
Yeah, we can do that.
Better than using paper throwaway cups.
So, are we ready? All right. Well, I know it feels a whole lot more formal tonight than it's supposed to feel. But this is a study session, not a regular session. And I'll call it to order now and ask Leila Aman and Kelly Keener to join us to talk about the Downtown Business Association.
Good evening, Mayor, Councilors. Leila Aman, your Development Manager for the city. My job's easy. I'm going to hand the mic over to Kelly and have her give us an update. But we are in touch. We're working together constantly and really, I think, have a lot of things going on right now. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Those gray hairs right there, those are yours from me, right?
Did you have to point that out on camera?
Yeah, but I have many, many more than you do. For sure. Oh, well, just going to update you a little bit on some of the fun stuff, and then a couple comments of things that we're working with Leila on. And actually, I just chatted with Peter out in the hallway and made mention of, and it sounds like he's already on it, so that's great news to hear. He's quite a gem for certain. So, and you told me that he would be, and he truly is. So, happily, we are halfway through the first Friday season. I'm very happy to say. It's been incredibly successful this year. Our numbers are up significantly. We've done some things from an advertising standpoint a little bit differently this year. And I think that the draw of artists that we have and the push by the businesses to really be involved in it this year has really made a difference. So it's been really exciting. My expectations truly for July were a little lower numbers because of the holiday and then not know with it in the middle of the week where everybody was. And our attendance was pretty phenomenal. So, and it was a great night. In fact, we were trying to find places for vendors Friday night. So I'm going to work with Jason on that to secure some more space. We had a little miscommunicate, but I think we'll get that solved pretty quickly. I'm going to jump a little bit ahead in the season because we've hesitated to do a whole lot this year until we know when construction starts and streets and all that activity. It's sort of, as I say to everybody in the meetings, it's a very fluid conversation. So we've not committed to a lot of things until we sort of can nail down that calendar and that schedule. I will talk about October 1st Friday. We're pretty excited about it. Working with the folks from Art Mob, Chris Haberman, and the schools, and what we're attempting to do, and anybody that can help with the art directors at any of the schools, that would be awesome. We are attempting to put together art shows in the businesses produced by the students, one sort of their welcome back, and taking it to another level in having the artists come and actually do what if I've created my art, now what do I do with it? So how do I hang my art, or how do I sell my art, or how do I interact at a reception, and that kind of thing. So we're working pretty diligently on that to accomplish that for our.
Cool idea.
It's great. We're really excited, and that's exactly the reaction. Everybody's like, we just have to figure out how to make this happen. So we're jazzed about it. October 27th, just as a reminder, will be the downtown trick-or-treat. I don't think we will ever not do that again. It's such a fun time. And yeah, everyone looks forward to that, so we're pretty excited about it. And then right behind that, the following Saturday on November 3rd, we tentatively, weather permitting, have a downtown cleanup in preparation for the holiday seasons, where the businesses will go kind of through. We've sort of gone through all of our First Fridays, the trick or treat, that kind of thing, and we'll do that big cleanup. So if anybody feels like throwing on a rain jacket because it's likely to rain, and work gloves, you're welcome to join us. We will participate in Small Business Saturday this year. That's not something that, as a business committee, we've chosen to do in the past, but we've decided to go ahead and do that this year. And then on December 8th, during our umbrella parade, we're working right now to do sort of an open house or a Market on Main style vendors street side. It's always weather permitting. So if it rains, we've got to move people inside. If it's lovely, like most of the time it is, we can have vendors out street side and that kind of thing. So that's one of those fluid activities right at the moment. Talked with Peter a little bit. There's some feedback that I've gotten about some of the landscaping and things like that on McLaughlin, and I understand that he's working pretty diligently on that. Our intent is to put our best foot forward, and in order to accomplish that, we want to make sure that we keep our downtown looking, but anything coming into or introducing people into downtown, we want to make sure that that gets accomplished as well. And it's pretty rough out there, as Peter and I were just chatting about. So that, I know he's working on that pretty diligently. And then I know that we're working on signage and things like that for the McLaughlin 224. I'm not going to talk a lot about parking tonight, because I know that that's our next big conversation here in a few minutes. And we've got some folks coming that we're going to kind of listen in. We've met with everyone and had a lot of input into it. What I will tell you is we have a very, very strong consensus within the association in regards to John and the parking enforcement. He is the perfect person for the job. He gets it. He's amazing. We've not ever had anybody quite like him. Taking nothing away from Tim. Tim has done a great job back in the day when he was doing it, but we really, and I think Luke can even touch on that. Every meeting he attends, our association meeting, checks in with us, provides information, and we just really, truly cannot say enough about him. So our hope is that in these conversations, there's a very serious consideration for the fact that we really need him as a full-time employee here in Milwaukee. He's a huge part of our business community. He's a huge part of our community. And we really, can you see my passion for that conversation?
How do you really feel about it?
Want that to be a large part of the conversation as we move forward through this, because parking's not easy, and we recognize that. There's a lot of layers to it, and as we'll go through all that this evening. But again, we have the right person. I don't want to see us lose the right person. So, anything for me?
Can I add two quick things?
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry. And the first is Kelly mentioned there's a ton of stuff happening in the fall, in the winter, and we successfully got a grant for $2,700, a tourism grant from Clackamas County, and we'll be working together to utilize those resources to help promote those events. So that's cool. And then just for the benefit of the public, you might have seen SoDo. We're so doing this right now. We have launched our website relative to the construction that's happening in South Downtown. So for those that are watching, it's milwaukeeoregon.gov/South Downtown. You can learn about all the projects that will be starting construction, I think this week. Axle Tree should begin. And then the city's projects will begin shortly after. So we're really excited about that, and we've been trying to do some marketing around that to get people interested and have a place to land when they have questions.
And the map, has it been well received? People like it?
Yeah, it's a great tool. You know, it's nice to have multiple comments. You know, you learn every time you print something. So we have a couple things that we're going to maybe adjust. We always laugh about that. But yeah, it's been a great tool for us to have. And I think a lot of the businesses are just, they're happy to have something. It gives us an option. And
Do you think it's out there pretty widely?
I'm not really sure how the distribution happened.
Yeah,
I know that I carry them in my car now because I find that they're not everywhere. So yeah, I usually try to keep some in my car with me when I'm out running around or running errands and that kind of thing. And I am trying to drop some sort of outside of the area, sort of on the outskirts a bit.
That's good. We give a lot away at the farmers market.
We did.
You know, just every week that I have worked there, that's the one constant, you know, folks pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. So and we're working really hard on First Friday too to have that map to you folks. I'm hoping that you're getting those in time for the farmers market as well. So kind of a secondary tool.
I had a question about the art from the schools. I think that's an amazing project, and boy, I wish you all the success. I'm wondering if you have worked with or are working with Clackamas County Arts Alliance on
We
that.
have not reached out to them as of yet.
Yeah, that might be a good place for some instructors and some what do I do with my art afterwards kind of thing. And then there are grants available through them also that, you know, might be available to you. So
yeah, perfect. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I had a couple questions regarding First Friday. You said that, first of all, attendance was up, but also that you had changed the advertising a little bit, and I'm curious as to what changed, and how do you think attendance is trending compared to last year?
Oh, we're probably, if we're to look at the numbers, we're up about 25-30% over last year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's, some of that is, you know, the easiest gauge is your vendors and their success and their constant. And we have vendors that are actually selling out a product, and they take their numbers up 20-25% every time. We actually are seeing more activity on our social media. We do still a lot of print ad, but we really have put a press on social media. That's been where the activity is coming, and the amount of, you know, the shares and the activity off of that portion of it.
Are you using social media other than Facebook? Are you using Twitter and
we don't
Instagram or anything? No.
It's a personal thing more than anything else, to be honest with you. Staying away from Twitter. Really, it's been Instagram. We added Instagram last year, and we just kind of got started with it. And then this year, we've really, up with intent with Instagram this year. That's the spot that they all go to. And it was a lesson learned last year because we canceled in August. We had to cancel with the fires and everything. And it was interesting because I had forgotten about the Instagram account, and so I'd sent out, you know, emails to the businesses and all the activity, and I did the posts on Facebook and all of that, and I totally forgot about Instagram. And we still had they were like, those were our Instagram followers. So that was a good learning lesson for sure.
And then, relevant to our next topic that's coming up, you had mentioned that John gets it regarding parking enforcement, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on what that meant.
The statement made by John, and it's a huge appreciation by our business community. He said, it's not in my best interest to write tickets, it's my best interest to move cars and keep them moving so that the businesses can get the traffic and we keep the cars moving and we keep the activity happening. I will share with you also that we have a loading zone at the end of our block, and I've heard this from other spots in the city too, where we have some customers that are elderly, and so if we've got employees parked in those parking places, they can't pull up to our businesses. He said, hey, pull in there real quick, let them run in and get what it is they need, and then off they go. And he will come and actually check with us to ensure that it's not one of our customers that's in a loading zone before he writes the ticket. And typically it's someone that shouldn't be there. It's somebody that's gone to the other, like Wonderland or something like that. So
okay.
He's not about writing a ticket. He's not about that. It's not about that. It's about supporting the businesses and helping people to understand where they can park, how they can park, and what the picture looks like downtown. And then he does look after the businesses and the retail.
Okay.
Really.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's it.
Good.
Perfect.
you.
Thank you very much.
Stay here.
All right, next up, we stick with Layla, and we bring up our parking consultant, Rick Williams.
Great.
Also, would it be okay to get Owen in there as well?
Yeah, let's bring up Owen. Sorry, I didn't realize. Okay. Pull up the chair, Owen.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, well, we are entering into our second discussion around parking. Last time we came and talked with you, we were able to give you kind of an overview of the scope of work that we were doing and some initial data. And since that time, we've done a lot of work. These guys have done a lot of work. And just for the record, we have Rick Williams from Rick Williams Consulting and Owen Ronkeli, who's also project manager for this project and been really deeply involved. The team has done a background and code review. They've done an analysis of existing conditions. I think at our last meeting, we were actually out in the field doing survey work, a 10-hour survey of use. Since that time, the team has also done a future forecast of demand. So we've looked at existing conditions. We have a good sense of what our current picture looks like. And then we looked at what does the next 5 years look like. And Rick and Owen will talk a little bit about what those findings are. And we were able to give them some informed estimates of future projected development and the loss of parking. So that'll help us understand what that picture looks like. And then they also did a future forecast looking at 2040. So really taking the long view. What happens when our downtown is fully built out? Because even though it may be 20 years from now that we're thinking about, we have to start thinking about today what solutions we need to put into place to be ready as our downtown evolves. And so they're going to walk through those findings, talk with you about that tonight. And then we really want to have a conversation with you about some of the initial strategies. And I think that the list of initial strategies that we're proposing really reflect a lot of thought, really reflect the conditions that our downtown is in, and certainly in the next 5 years, and I think are achievable as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rick and Owen, and we'll probably pop back in at the end when we start discussing things.
Mayor Gamba and Council, thanks for having us back. As Layla said, we've done a lot of work. I think another thing we also did is I think we indicated at the last meeting, we were also in the process of doing one-on-one interviews with stakeholders downtown. Kelly hosted a really wonderful meeting with the DMBA, And it went on for a couple hours. It was really good. And we learned three? Was it three? We had a good time. And it was really good. So we've learned a lot. And as we said before, we like to take what we hear, but also match it up with goals and objectives and with real data. And I think you'll find that we did that. And hopefully you'll enjoy the show. Real quick, we're going to jump into the existing supply. We did that with you last time, so we won't spend a lot of time on it, but we do have some more information that we didn't have. So we'll hit on that and get through that quickly. I think you really want to talk about both current and future projected demand, what is going to happen in 5 years and in 20 years, and then some of the initial strategy considerations. We're not going to go through all of them with you today. There's actually 27 strategies, as you saw in the summary report we did, which is just a summary. We're going to detail that out in the final report. We're just going to focus on those strategies that we think, if the question came up, what's the first thing we should do? We're going to go through those strategies. But if you have questions about any of the strategies, please feel free to let us know. And I think because of the informal nature of this work session is feel free to jump in at any time. We have a Q&A section. That doesn't mean you have to wait. So feel free to jump in. So with that, also I want to reintroduce Owen Ron Kelly. He's my business partner for 17 going on 20 years. He's really involved in the data work and the data analysis. So sometimes I present it, but he's here for technical support and answering any questions related to demand forecasting and how we did it. Because we also used the near-term data, but we also had to get into Metroscape data to forecast employment and residential development targeted for what is known as our study boundaries. So we actually narrowed the metro data into the study boundary itself. And there's the study boundary, as we talked about last time. It's a big area, about 698 on-street stalls, 2,300 off-street stalls, and the off-street stalls are located in 91 different sites. So a lot of stuff packed into that study area boundary. Here's how it breaks out. And again, we talked about this last time. Most of the parking is off-street, which is normal for downtowns. The interesting thing is 90% of the off-street parking or more is in private control. It's not something the city has any real direct relationship to influencing. They can encourage, you could partner, but right now, and particularly when the lot across the street goes away with development, the city may be completely out of the off-street business. So that's something we'll want to talk about under the policy considerations. We talked a little bit real quickly. Your on-street parking is mostly 2-hour parking and 4-hour and no limit parking, unregulated parking, no rules. We said that was a little unusual, and some of the recommendations will begin to address that, as you'll see how that affects the data, how that breakout of short-term 2-hour stalls to no limit stalls, how it affects your turnover. And Kelly talked about businesses needing turnover. So we'll talk about that. Here's the location of all those off-street parking sites. We showed you this map last time as well. Remember, just because it's a big green doesn't mean that's a big site. These are tax parcels. And in the larger data report that you got, each one of these sites has its own individual identifier, and you can go to the number on the site, like site 51, and in the report it will tell you how many stalls are on that site, who the ownership of that site is, and now with the data report, how many cars were actually parked on that site at a given peak hour of the day. So. We do want to real quickly go through what we heard from the stakeholders, and we heard a lot. And this isn't everything. That'll be in the report. We have our notes, and we'll have a summary. But we felt that these were the statements that we heard over and over again. So these would be real common themes that we heard, as opposed to just hearing everything. And so I want the stakeholders to know that you were heard, and there's a lot more than this. But these are the things we thought, if there's consensus, if it was said more than once, it has more meaning than maybe if it was said just once. So the city's role, what we heard from the stakeholders is more active leadership, become more active rather than maybe passive in how we're planning and managing and presenting the parking in the downtown. Need for better signage and communications, but also to begin to focus more and more on options to parking, particularly as you grow. Residents who live here could be car-free, or residents who live here could not drive their cars, they could take transit. And the same thing with employees who work here. What are our long-term opportunities with this light rail system to put more and more of our growth and access growth onto the transit system? They want the city to take a lead role in exploring that. There's a real concern with the loss of existing off-street parking supply to new development, and some of our demand forecasting will give you an idea of what that means. But parking is going away, but not necessarily are we netting new parking back. I'll make this number up. We take 100 out and we only put 75 back or something like that. People are concerned about that, and they're seeing it happen, and I think in the next 5 years it's going to be, obviously with the planned developments, much more prominent. New parking that is being built may not be enough. And again, the demand forecasting will help in this discussion. The only parking that's required is residential parking. Commercial parking in basically this study zone is not required for new development. And so what does that mean? And I just, from the stakeholders, it's a concern. There's a concern that we're not going to net out what we need, and we're going to create congestion. And of course, the loss of the parking from the new development, both the city and the metro lots, are going to be potential net losses of parking. Particularly if commercial were put back and parking wasn't built, because the commercial is not required to provide the parking. The residential is, and we want to see that as a resource going forward. There's a concern as new development happens that the city is very sensitive about allowing on-street parking to be removed. And so as designs and new development comes forward in the planning process, the city should be very sensitive that there's not a lot of parking in on-street, 698 stalls. And that's a very valuable resource. It's where everybody wants to park. So loss of that is a concern to the stakeholders. And there's a need for more enforcement. And I think our data supports that. One of the recommendations is to look at increasing enforcement, not only because of the turnover rate, which is low, but because the violation rate is higher than the existing enforcement can keep up with. It's not that enforcement's not doing a good job. There are just more violations out there than the existing allocation of labor can keep up with. And we do know that right now the enforcement is running, it pays for itself. Some even more than one person said Saturdays, as Saturday business growth occurs, that we may have to look at adding enforcement on Saturdays as well to ensure that turnover occurs.
So I had a question actually about that.
Yes, sir.
The day you did the survey, was he working that day?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And he provided us his ticket totals for that day, and they were robust. But still, the violation rate was even higher than his ticket total. So that's something to think about. Off-street parking, which was really good to hear from the business community, how they value the on-street parking. It goes with that concern about the loss, being sensitive to the loss of on-street parking with new development, was we've got to get employees off the street. That the burden to walk should possibly go to the employee rather than the customer. If your employees are not walking, your customer is, I think is kind of how you boil it down. And so that there was clear, that was almost a unanimous consent that we need to do a better job. Why do we have permits on the street, particularly in areas near commercial businesses? And so we have some recommendations for that in the strategy plan, Customer First program that Wild is aware of, we've talked about for years. And then a need for a coordinated program to match business employees into private underutilized lots, which is that Customer First program, a shared parking program. As you'll see from the data, there's 1,000, today there's 1,000 empty parking stalls off-street, but the city has no control over those stalls. So a business-to-business, peer-to-peer process supported by the city is a direction that the business community was very interested in pursuing.
So can we talk about that for a minute? I've always wondered why, I mean, it's to me the sort of most obvious one is the Nelson's Nautilus, which is fairly close to the central core of the business district and way underutilized. And why aren't they selling parking places? Or maybe they are. I guess I've heard anecdotally that they were renting some out and the bowling alley was renting some out. And I don't know if that's true. I mean, your numbers show that they're not renting out terribly many if they are. Why aren't we seeing more of that?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, and the Customer First program would help. But some of the reasons why lots tend to be underutilized is, first, the property owners don't know why it's to their benefit to provide parking to someone who's not using their business. So that's a challenge to overcome, and that can be overcome in a Customer First program through the DMB, supported by the city, to say this is part of a downtown vision. You need to participate because it's good for all of us. Data, sometimes, believe it or not so much here, but in other areas, lot owners think their lots are full. And so the data helps prove and confirm, particularly if the data is done in a routine manner, that no, you're always sitting on these number of empty stalls. And then the third one oftentimes is liability. People worry about, well, who's responsible for litter? What if someone gets hurt? And there's actually, Oregon law is pretty good in that, and there's a thing called bailment, which is if it's posted on a private lot that says not responsible for loss, theft, or damage, they're not responsible for loss, theft, or damage in any other case other than sheer negligence. But people don't know that. They think, well, I have to do this, my insurance is going to go up. But it really doesn't. So it's an education effort. But those are the three main reasons. But oftentimes they can be overcome through that peer-to-peer relationship.
Actually, that last one did come up vis-a-vis the farmers market, because I'm on the board of that, and we use a lot of downtown parking lots, but we had a couple of businesses say, oh, you've got to insure me, you've got to buy me an insurance policy, and I didn't know about the bailment.
Right.
So
really quick, if I can, as a quick aside, when you go downtown Portland, whenever you go into a facility, you pull a ticket, and you'll look at it, and it's got this language on it. Well, that's what the language is. It's bailment. It's notifying them that if someone hits you or you hit someone, it's a relationship between your insurance company and their insurance company. We have no responsibility for that. And that has worked, and that's gone all the way to the Oregon Supreme Court in the past. But yeah, I think that's part of the educational effort. And I think getting back into let's treat our parking as a community resource to the highest degree that we can, because it's part of a downtown vision.
Rick,
yes.
Before you go any further, you had said that 90% is in private control. Is that unusual from your other data?
I think it is, because most of the towns we work in, the reason they get us to do a parking study is because they have an on and an off street system. So the amount of parking that is in control by the city in Milwaukie is unusual for the cities that we've done studies for. Always it's the highest percentages in private control. But, I'll give you an average. The cities we work with, it can vary anywhere from the city's control is between 15 and 30% of the off-street supply. Yeah, yours, and particularly now with potentially being completely out of the business, is difficult. It is a little bit unusual. It's the exception rather than the rule. So in terms of coming up with strategies to capture those 1,000 empty stalls, that's going to be a challenge, and that's why I think we kind of suggested this peer-to-peer, put it in the context of a downtown vision, and have everybody buy into the vision. Just real quick, you'll remember this. All of our data we take back to this really simple system of measuring performance. If areas are in red, they're constrained and people are having trouble, both customers and employees, and it creates anxiety and angst. And it's not a good feeling that people have when things are very red. You want to be in the middle, as we've said before. That's the sweet spot, because one, there's always some parking available, but it's robust enough to support very vital business. And even though it's great to have lots of parking, generally if you're in the yellow to green, you've got the problem is not a parking problem. The problem is to really focus on your product, get more and more people here. And so that's how we evaluated your system, both at the macro level and then at the on-street, at the block-to-block level.
So I wanted to ask that question. So when you talk about that, is it concerning if a block is constrained, but all around it, everywhere else, is either efficient or parking readily available? Or
that's a great question, Mayor. Usually, and when we've done, you'll show today, we did the macro system, and then we came down and looked at just what we call the area of highest occupancy. No, that's what happens sometimes. You'll have a block face or two that are very red, and the business community will come in and say, nobody can find parking. And then you find out that within 300 feet, there's lots of parking. It's really using the red to say, what are we doing block to block, but where are the clusters of parking that present a concern? So the 85% rule allows you to look at things at the block level, and it allows you to look things at a supply level. It allows you to look at each individual lot as as its own little microcosm, its own little operating system. So it's really just a discussion point. But we know that if you have lots of red, then we want to have a discussion. If you don't have lots of red, I always look at that as an opportunity and say, now what do we need to do to fill it? What do we need to do to move it more efficiently? And what do we need to do to get areas of red to be able to use the non-red areas? So the red is really just a discussion point. Last time we were here, I think we had this. This is the on-street system. So the 638 stalls that are in the on-street system reach a peak occupancy at 2 p.m. of 58%. What's interesting about this slide, and I'll reinforce it when we get to the combined slides, is what is unusual. I go to Councilor Abma's question about what's common or what's the normal. It's unusual that your occupancy actually drops at the typical retail peak hour. So between 11 and 2, you can see the occupancy drops. So people are leaving the system at a point when, and we had a conversation with the DMBA about this too, at a point when the typical downtown would actually be loading up. The good news is your highest, then they all come back plus some. They come back there at 2 p.m. and some of your higher occupancies, are at 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. So it's an abnormality that we see in it, but it's a discussion for, do we need to promote more into that time of day? What is our product mix on street? Do we have enough types of businesses that attract a midday peak? Because this is when you have a lot of opportunity.
I noticed that the off-street parking actually peaks at that time when you're from 11 to 1.
Right.
And is that because, I was thinking, is that restaurants? The only restaurant with a parking lot is Libby's, right? So that's not a huge.
Yeah. What it says.
Chan's, yeah. And Grandma's.
We don't have Counselor, we don't have a real good answer for that. Because this is, like we said, this is kind of an unusual thing that we've found. We don't find in other cities. Usually it's a typical bell curve. Mm-hmm. And you might have 2 peaks where, the highest line would generally be at that 12 to 1, then it would come down, and then it might come right back at 4. You get that evening peak. So I think it's just an anomaly that we saw. But what it says is that there are some people who are choosing to leave Milwaukie
for lunch.
So many employees are parking on the street and they're leaving for lunch. And
right.
They're back and moving their car to another floor space. So it actually makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. One of the things that, these are just some metrics we didn't have for you last time. So the first one is the average length of stay. What we did is we pulled out all of the permits that you allow on street and just looked at people who don't have permits. And the average stay is about 1 hour and 45 minutes. If you load the permits back in, which are employees, long-term parkers, the average length of stay goes to 2.5 hours. The good news about this is you allow 2-hour parking. Your customer is not needing more than the 2 hours. So that's a good thing. A thing that's difficult is that, going back to one of Kelly's points about turnover, the average downtown in the industry, you would want a turnover rate over a 10-hour period of at least 5 turns per stall. But because you've loaded up the on-street system, not loaded up, but because you've added into the on-street system, 1, employee permits, and 2, so many no-limit stalls, about half that supply is in no limit, there's just a lot of people parking on street long-term. And we would want to get them off the longer-term parking off the street into those 1,000 empty stalls off-street and allow our customer to park where they want to park, is right on street, right in front of the businesses. So something we need to work on, and that's why the more enforcement is, 1, as you'll see in the strategies jumping ahead, let's work on getting employees off street through a shared use program, peer-to-peer shared use program. And then let's add some enforcement that allows the turnover to occur. We also anecdotally saw, our surveyors saw, a lot of the cars moving from the 4-hour lot to the on-street system and back, which means that was an employee. Doesn't have a permit, moving back and forth. And so again, reducing the amount of no-limit stalls and also increasing enforcement is going to help that turnover rate, which will help the businesses, because every turn is a sale. So if you're getting 3.7 turns at $1, you make $3.74. If you get 5 turns at $1, you're making $5. And that's what we need to do. Off-street, the peak hour is at 11 o'clock rather than at 2. About 50% occupancy. And again, the key here is the 1,033 empty stalls off-street. If we had to put a price on that, it's about $40 million of value in parking if you had to replace that in structured parking. So that's a huge opportunity just waiting to happen. And it can save money long-term for the time being, is absorb as much of our growth and place the right person in the right stall. And can we capture these empty stalls? The more we capture off-street, the more our on-street system is going to be available for the user we need it to be for. There's a small drop in off-street use at noon, but not as pronounced as what we saw in the on-street system. Here's the first heat map of the colors, and you can see a lot of green. And I'll do another map here in a minute of the what we call the high occupancy zone. But it's easy. You can see the red, and it goes back to the mayor's point. You know, there's a couple blocks there on 21st and, oh, I wish I could see.
Monroe, and it's around Key Bank.
Where you have these 2 blocks in one lot that are full, and then you've got another one just to the right on 21st. So that 2 blocks may feel really, really packed. But as the mayor said, we need to do a better job. Part of it's our signage program, the things we need to do. But I think there's some people that could come downtown if they want to park in front of a certain business who could say, there's not enough parking here. But overall, we've got a lot of opportunity in the system, both on-street and off-street. Here's the high occupancy core zone. And all we did here is we asked the computer where the majority of trips occur during a day. So our model can tell us, you know, out of the 3,700 cars that we saw that day, 60% or more are happening here. So this is model saying this is your core zone. And what's nice about it, it confirms this is your downtown. This is your highest use downtown. But even at the peak hour, there's a lot of off-street opportunity if we could capture it. But, you know, there's 3 off-street facilities that are in the red. And there's some block faces. You can see that 7 of the 23 block faces in this zone, 30% have occupancies that exceed 85%. And I made a mistake. At the same hour, 3 of 20 off-street facilities have occupancies over 85%. So there's opportunity, but I can see as you get down to this smaller zone, there's some people who are trying to park on street. They're not necessarily allowed to or know they could park off street, and so they could feel as though they're constrained in this area.
Just off, I'm not sure if you can answer this question, but what proportion of these spots are 2-hour or 4-hour or unrestricted?
Most of these are 2 hours. In fact, all of these are 2 hours,
All of these are 2?
Except the stalls that allow permits. And
Okay.
I could get that break. I don't have it right here, but we have that in the data. We could tell you that they're marked 2 hours, but there are stalls in here that are marked 4 hours or by permit.
Okay.
On street, you're saying, or you're talking about this lot, you're talking about on street?
On street.
I thought those were all just down on the south end.
No,
those
there's some
are right
in here.
No?
But we can get those breakouts for you.
But yeah, I'm interested about the relationship between, you know, the availability of, you know, essentially just free parking and whether or not that, you know, is a disincentive to a shared parking program. And so I think that might be really helpful information to have.
Well, it could be, but when you talk about what would it be if we had pricing on street, right now, your occupancies are so low
Right.
that pricing would be risky.
Right.
Where you would want to price is, again, off-street, which seems counterintuitive, but make it a program that's, the enforcement makes it happen. Because just the cost to collect on-street revenue, because you probably don't have the volumes to even pay for that.
Well, isn't the same true for the off-street? I mean, the private, you know, owners who operate those, now all of a sudden they're in a business of operating parking lots and having to enforce their own, you know, limits and permitting and all of that. And so if they're having to spend extra money, you know, they're going to have to charge for it. But is there a market there when we have all of this free available parking on the
I think
street?
there is, because you're selling permits now.
Yeah.
So people want permits. And so if you take away the opportunity to park on street, and provide the same opportunity at a price that you're providing on-street in an off-street lot, I think the market's there.
Okay.
It's not going to be huge. I think what you're charging now is about $20, $30 a month
50.
per permit, but you're selling permits now.
Yeah.
So there is a market for them.
Okay.
But the challenge is taking away the opportunity for long-term parkers to park on street. So that's the 2-hour time limit and enforcement.
Right. Okay.
So that's going to be important.
Rick, when you said earlier that right now enforcement's paying for itself, that's true? This is a fact?
That's what we've been told, yes.
Yes. But part of the reason that it's difficult is when we're doing enforcement, we're going to the court system, right? So it's Kim's time, it's court, it's all those pieces. So we can get you how that breaks out in general. But our understanding is that all of those things today with how we're running the program are paying for themselves with that process.
Is that including the permit system, or is that just the tickets?
That is just tickets. So we do also do some code enforcement through Tim, that we do a collection through our court system, but I believe that that is just with parking.
So we want to jump now to the demand forecast. And this is what Owen is here for. So Owen, jump in at any time. This is the first 5 years, and we know that there's four projects in the pipeline now that are going to happen. And so what will happen, they will remove 400 stalls of existing parking. So we looked at the sites themselves, and that removes 400 existing stalls. They replace those 400 stalls with 472 stalls to serve 540 residential dwelling units. And the reason you'll see that the net stalls are only in the residential, because the model assumes that we're only modeling at this time for parking that we know will be built, because it's required that the residential provide parking at a certain ratio. The reason we see 40,000 square feet of retail and 10,000 square feet of office with no supply chain change is because that from a model point of view, we're going to assume that they're not going to build parking. It doesn't mean that they won't, but just so we can see what would the impact be if all we had was the parking that was required. So again, we get a net 72 stall increase in parking with these new developments that results in 540 residential dwelling units and about 50,000 square feet of commercial. So little bit busy, but there's two results. And traditionally, residential parking developments don't share their parking. So they'll build the 472 stalls, but they won't even allow their own commercial users, employees, or visitors to use the space that they build. What's interesting about these demand models is we can predict, based on other sites in the region that we've worked with and using other ULI models, how demand for specific users will occur in every hour of the day. So the top model shows you that we assume that they're going to build the 472 stalls for the 540 housing units, but they're not going to share it. They're just going to put a gate on the front of it, and only residents are allowed to park. If that happens, 200 additional vehicles would have to park on the street because there would be no other option, either on the street or in some of those other empty stalls that remain of the 1,000 that, we had 400, we removed 400, so that means there would be about 600 empty stalls off-street. But that development is going to create 200 stalls of demand that needs to go somewhere because they're not allowed back into the parking the new parking that's been built. And that's the yellow trough. So you see the yellow trough, that is in the middle of the day, that new garage sitting there with empty parking.
So is that taking into account parking lot 23, I think you called it? The one at Kellogg Point?
Yes.
Which doesn't currently get used at all?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Does.
What we learned, interestingly, of those 400 stalls that get removed, there's only 150 people parking on them now. So this includes the displaced demand of those who are, so even though you're removing 400 parking stalls, you're only removing 150 stalls of demand. Half of that demand that's the 150 is actually in retail or commercial that will go down and then come back. So the net difference is only 75 stalls of existing demand gets transferred, plus the new demand from the new commercial and office uses. But the point here being, as you can see, if we could load and encourage that development to be more general access oriented, we could put all of the demand in the near-term forecast into the trough of empty parking that would sit there in the middle of the day. So that's kind of the worst case, best case scenario.
And in your experience, so in your experience with other cities, we do allow for shared parking, and I understand that some cities don't. So is that, do you see, and is there I guess we'll get into this with strategies, but I'm really interested in this.
Yeah, let's go through this if you don't mind,
okay.
Councilor, because I think it's a key question. Is do you make them or do you encourage them, or what can you do? It goes back to your three questions earlier, or your questions asking why won't they do it? But you can see the capacity's there, it's just we need to use it. Otherwise, it's going to get pushed to the on-street system and into other people's facilities. This is just the same way of looking at it. You can see that in the middle column, that hatched white at the top is empty parking at the peak hour.
It's the residential piece.
It's the residential piece. And you can see the blue being the on-street system. In that near-term middle 1 p.m. column, if we don't share the parking, the on-street system increases significantly to about 89% occupancy. And that assumes it distributes across that whole study zone, which is speculative. So again, it just shows you if we can get them to share, we can contain all of the parking within the new development with the parking that they're required to build, and our occupancy would go from 49% to 58% on street.
Have you ever seen that work with mechanical parking?
It's more difficult with mechanical parking because it's so difficult for visitors to use it.
And they wouldn't be necessarily coded to a space.
Right. But yeah, mechanical parking, go ahead.
It works best in exclusively residential situations.
Yeah.
The mechanical piece.
Yeah, as a vendor told me once, it takes about 10 minutes to learn how to use the system first. Once you know how to use it, it's easy, but with transient population, that's a 10-minute training every time they come in, so it's difficult.
And so one thing really quick about these three bars here is the first one is the existing conditions. The center is the exclusive parking where commercial doesn't have access to the residential component. Right. And then the third one is the shared use. And so what you can see is there is capacity in the on-street system, even in an exclusive scenario. So but if we did that, if we added all that additional supply on-street, we only have a 70 stall surplus in the on-street system. So we've sucked up all that availability. So when we're left with 70 stalls left, in the shared use scenario, we have a 270 stall surplus. So there's a 200 stall swing if we can get those people to use that off-street system.
Do we have some kind of number of the employees that are playing the parking game? Do you have a?
We do in the larger report, yes. We have that in the data summary that you have. I don't have it right with me, but it's not a huge number because it could be the same number of license plates continuing to move. But even if it's, I think, in the range of 50 people, it's a significant amount of, 50 stalls on street is 250 visitor trips. So even if it's only 50 employees, it's a big number.
Right.
Real quickly then, because I know we're time limited, these are the long-term assumptions. So what this assumes is now using Metro data going out 20 years to say what would our impact be on new development. The Metro model, and what we did is we accumulated, we put removed the existing parking, so we're accounting for those first 4 planned developments, and then what additional is created after that. It's about 98,000 square feet of retail, which includes it actually includes the 40,000 from the near term, so about a 58,000 increase after the near term developments, 128,000 square feet of office, and 810 total residential units, all cumulative. So we're assuming that if the residential has to build the parking, there would be 709 additional parking.
I just want to be clear what you're saying. So in the next 5 years, we'll have 500 and some odd residential units.
Correct.
And over the following 25 years, no.
Like
right?
18 years.
18 years, only another 310?
According to the Metro model.
Well, actually, the Metro model states that there's only going to be 238 multifamily units built in the next 25 years. You're building 450, you're building 500. You're going to double that number in the next 5 years. So we made an assumption, I made an assumption. What I did is I took, over the next 15 years, that I took half of the development that's going to be built in the next 5 years. So I took half of what the existing supply was, because I didn't feel comfortable saying that no residential development was going to be built, so I had to use something, and so that's what we used in this model. So,
and then, do you take into account changes in the transportation system?
No.
No.
This model doesn't, which is an opportunity, which you'll see in the recommendations. This assumes that the developments will have to accommodate their demand within the parking supply. So that's a great question also, Mayor. The model is worst case parking.
Worst case. That's
worst case parking, with the caveat that Metro's model, we think, is a little bit flawed on,
How do you think?
particularly with your light rail system. So same theory. What we did is, just like in the near term, we just loaded it all in and said what would happen if we were to be able to look at the parking that we know that will be built because it's required, and how that would distribute out in terms of demand. As you can see on the upper graph, about 500 additional vehicles, if they're not allowed to share the parking that's built, are going to be out there trying to find a place to park, either on street or in other facilities, other private facilities. But look at the trough again, the yellow trough. If we're able to capture the trough, there still is, in 20 years, a potential deficit of parking of about 130 stalls in the peak hour.
Yeah, the next slide will show
the next slide, same as we did last time. You can see, in restricted parking environments, where residential parking is not being shared, it's just sitting empty, both on the existing supply, because that has the near-term demand, the near-term projects, and then you look at the middle, and it's a large area of empty parking at the middle of the day, which pushes that brown. Look at the blue. Your on-street system is fully maximized, 100%, which is untenable.
There's essentially a 300 stall deficit on street. So those 300 people are going to have to find off-street locations if they're not able to share parking.
But if we're able to share parking, you can see the system becomes a bit more constrained. Then your on-street system is 78% occupied, but you still have about 140 stalls of surplus within your on-street system, and you can contain the rest of the demand within the built supply. So I think what the model is saying over and over and over again is shared parking is really a key solution that you need to pursue. And again, this model does not assume that some of these commercial developers might provide parking. We assume they wouldn't, simply because they're not required to. So that's, again, this is worst case. Which then leads us to the near-term recommendations. We really believe you need to have a point person for parking in the city. So that there's a single point. Layla's kind of playing that role now, but I think there needs to be someone whose portfolio is parking, so that there's a go-to person, there's someone that can call, and someone that's bird-dogging this plan that hopefully you'll adopt that has 27 strategies. Someone's got to manage that. We think that the continued coordination with the downtown community, we called it a parking advisory committee, but it doesn't need to be that. But we think there needs to be routine check-ins with the stakeholder community every 3 to 6 months to say, where are we in the plan? What help do we need in the plan? Where can we partner with each other to communicate this plan? Do not allow employee permits on street in the core. We need to work on, but that is going to, I'm going to actually jump ahead to the, before I talk about enforcement, that's going to be really contingent upon our success in working with businesses who have empty parking to allow us to locate employers who are willing to make their employees park somewhere to actually do it. So we need to find off-street facilities where private sector folks will let us place our employees, and then once we do that, we can then eliminate the permit program on street. We shouldn't eliminate the program and not give our employees an option. But the shared use and getting employees off the street go hand in hand. With that means we'll increase the number of 2-hour stalls by attritioning down the number of no-limit stalls, and then reinforcing that with enforcement. The off-street shared use program will only be as good as the enforcement that we have to make them park off-street and make it sure that if you park on-street, you're going to get tagged. But we know our
and would you also have part of that be, isn't a lot of this lot over here, those 2 aisles, 4 hour?
Yes.
And so you would reduce those to 2 hour?
No, we would do a combination of, well, that's kind of going away.
Well,
Yeah, but
at
we
some
would-
point.
Yeah, it would be an attrition of 4 hours to 2 hours and a combination of 2-hour stalls and permit stalls. As long as it's off-street, I think that's our priority. But we'd eventually balance out.
But I mean, that 4 hour feeds, I think makes it easier for the park,
That's
for
what
the
we saw.
employee shuffle.
Yeah, we saw the shuffle
Yeah.
happening between the lots and the on-street system.
Yeah.
Improved signage and wayfinding, I think that's apparent. I think people are coming down and not knowing where they could park. If we had a 2-hour zone in the core and possibly a 3-hour core zone sort of on the periphery, we could actually make a map and add that into communication so that people know there's parking available, kind of again to the mayor's point. If you just want to go 3 blocks, we'll let you park longer. And then this is an important one. You look at those deficit numbers, even though they're manageable, is what is the role of the city if we got to the point and says, okay, we do have a 130 to a 500 stall deficit of parking. What is the city's role? This strategy, this recommendation is y'all going to have a conversation, because with the loss of the city lot, you're kind of out of the off-street parking business. And so we may need to re-clarify what the city's role and participation could be in addressing any deficits that occur in the future. And there's no right or wrong answer to it, but I think there needs to be clear sense of we're down to 0 off-street stalls and we're managing a permit program. So what is the city's role, and address that in the future. If the city wants to go forward, or the community needs to go forward with a new facility, which it looks like it's further down the road, where would it be? Does there need to be planning now to save sites? Some cities actually land bank sites for parking until they can make a determination as to whether the city may need to build it or whether the private sector would build the parking in return for that piece of property. But strategic location of parking is important now because their lots are going really fast. And so that discussion needs to occur. And then looking at funding options and sources, depending on how the city lands on the discussion of what is our role in downtown. And then finally, I end on it because of your question, Mayor, and I kind of anticipated it, is none of this considers the role that the light rail system can play in Milwaukee. And so the city taking a lead role on employee transit programs to maximize that is something you need to begin looking at now, because that could have a significant impact on this model because we didn't consider it at all. So with that, that's where we are. And so I hope you ask a lot of questions, but any more questions based on your time, we're glad to provide.
Does it consider the increase in usage of Uber and potentially autonomous vehicles? And it doesn't consider any of that, I'm sure, or I suspect not.
This model does not. No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, I think based on some of the numbers that we saw from the Metro model, I think it's more historically based, and so that's why I think it skewed more heavily to commercial development rather than residential development. But if you looked at what's been built in the last 5 to 7 years, it's almost exclusively residential. Okay. And so that's why I think you see some of those skewed numbers. So I don't think it accounts for that. I think it will make these numbers look better if you were to take those into consideration.
Yeah, I think with the transit and the new technologies, I think you need to add that into that discussion. But we wanted to run it as a pure parking model, so you could see sort of the best case and the worst case from a parking view only. The opportunity for alternative modes and new technologies, I think, is huge, particularly because you have a light rail system here.
So what are some of the strategies that since there isn't really, I don't know that there's money or, in terms of buying property to build a parking lot or a structure or something, I don't know where that opportunity is, but I definitely am hearing lots of opportunity around shared parking. That message is clear, and so how...
For us, it's the $40 million question.
How are cities making that happen when the city can't be in the business of off-street parking anymore?
It's a great question, and I think it begins with that partnership you already have with the DMBA.
Sure.
Is the shared parking in cities that have been successful with it, is the city's role in those programs is a provider of information, the data, information about sites, the tax lot, all of that. But the actual sale of, I've got 3 employers with 8 employees. Now I'm the DMBA. And we know you have 8 empty stalls. We know you have 15 empty stalls, and we just want 8 of them. Will you work with us? Will you be a part of our partnership? That's where it worked best. Shared use programs that are led by the city, where the city goes and knocks on a door and says, I've got, again, 3 employers with 8 employees. Would you put them on your lot? They get suspicious very quick. DMBA Business Association can go in and say, this is a part of a broader vision for downtown. It's cost effective. It allows us to get to a garage in the future if we need one, but we need to use the supply that we have. And so it's a business to business, peer to peer, and the city is our strong partner in providing us information, data, and education. So that's the way it works best. It needs to be a peer to peer program, the city playing a key partnership role, but not leading it.
And again, the emphasis should also be on, the city should have a clear role in their responsibility for parking going forward. So it's a good communication piece for future developers that are out there and looking about what can I look to the city for in terms of expectation for parking. If I build my commercial development without any parking, do I assume the city is going to provide it in some other way? That should be clearly defined ahead of time so that there's no equivocation about whether or not the city has a role in providing parking or not.
And just real quick, I think one of the examples that Rick has mentioned to me is Oregon City, but they actually have a paid executive director of their downtown business association. So I think that, yes, I agree. I think the peer-to-peer is probably an essential component of it, but how we seed that and how that is actually executed, I think there has to be some consideration about the resources that would be required in order to support a peer-to-peer, an effective approach.
Thank you. Yeah, it can't be a total volunteer effort.
Yeah.
On either side, the city or the. But yeah, I think, again, just to finish that, we've seen successful shared use models and we've seen very unsuccessful. But the clear theme on the successful shared use models are some resources, the city playing the key partner role in terms of information, data, and education. But the actual initiation, catalyzing of a shared use program has to be peer-to-peer. Businesses talking to businesses. The city provides the data, city provides support, but we've just found that it's hard for cities to sometimes open the door, private, business to private versus private to private.
There's a little bit of stuff in your report about the residential neighborhoods and parking permit program for them. Did you actually talk to people there? Did you actually go to the historic Milwaukie neighborhood or anything like that?
No, we have not done that yet.
Okay. I just was curious as to what level of, and maybe Ann and Layla have a sense of this, what level of complaints we get about that, because we did create a system to do a residential parking permit program in advance of the light rail opening, sort of anticipating a problem, and then nobody's ever come forward and said, oh, there's a problem. We need a,
Well, go ahead.
No.
Well, I was going to say, if I could really quick, the good news is that that neighborhoods have an opportunity to ask for one. So that's work that you've already accomplished that is very important, because the most successful residential permit programs are those that are requested by the neighborhoods, not foisted upon the neighborhoods by the city. So simply having a policy, and maybe it's just, as this plan moves forward, is involve some of the neighbors in the discussions, because if we do reduce those number of no-limit stalls, the downtown grows, the new developments happen, there could be some spillover into the neighborhoods. The fact that you're ready for that because you have a policy, that's the key. And that neighbors know that they can activate it under certain conditions is what we found is we've had some cities that go into major light rail projects or major downtown redevelopment efforts. All of a sudden the neighbors come and they don't even have a policy. And so you're a year or two in the planning process to even get it on the books. So if that's the case, Councilor, you're way ahead of the curve on that. I think education to the neighbors is important, though.
and I think one of the parking factors for the neighborhoods, frankly, the high school, and they are building a bunch more parking as part of their project, so maybe that will also alleviate some. I was sort of surprised in your chart of usage that you listed the high school as having unused capacity, because, I mean, they're building like 150 more spaces. They obviously feel they don't they feel like they don't have capacity, so.
I just wanted to note that Historic Milwaukie NDA provided some written comments. There is some concern, and they have been talking about it at their meetings, and so that is something that's been.
It does come up.
It does.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Very informative.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think since we are a little behind, I'm going to rearrange here.
And actually, well, right before you do that, just so everyone knows, we're staying on air all night until we go into executive session because there's no planning commission.
Right. Hence us in this room.
Hence us in this room.
So we'll have our conversation with our partners at Portland General Electric, which will be introduced by Peter Pastorelli, our Public Works Director. And we'll have Brooke Berglund and Maria Pope.
Thank you.
Hi, my dear. How are you?
Peter, do I just
Thanks.
move the slides? I'll just move.
Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, he's like over the left. Yeah. I just told Ann to send him home. There's a reason for them to. Okay.
0710. Finals. Very bottom one.
Boy. Super code.
If you want to close
That one.
and there's no way to get it to be full screen. Maybe go to view. Or do you
There
know?
should be something that says like a, let's see. Full screen.
Full screen.
There we go. Okay. Would you like us to go ahead?
Yes, please. Thank you for coming.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us.
I was just going to introduce, I'm Peter Pastorelli, I'm the Public Works Director, and I wanted to introduce Maria Pope, the President and CEO of Portland General Electric, and Brooke Berglund, from the Government Affairs from PGE. And we've invited them tonight to talk about the changing energy landscape and how PGE is partnering with the city of Milwaukie to help us address the changing climate, and also to have a brief discussion about some rate issues.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you for having us. Peter, thank you for the introduction, as well as the terrific partnership that we have with you and also with Ann. I would say, just for the benefit of you all, your leadership in the city of Milwaukie is not only progressive, but pushes us. And I think that that's a good thing, and we've developed a terrific partnership. I would also say that you're becoming the envy of some of the other mayors, so be careful what you wish for, as you're setting a standard for how to think about a sustainable community in a holistic sense. You have the scale, the ability to work collaboratively in an effective and efficient manner, and it's an absolute pleasure, and I think that it will set a standard not only for Oregon, but for the entire Pacific Northwest and probably the country. So as we take a look at where we are with PGE, we'll go through a presentation. As Peter mentioned, I'll give you a little bit of highlights on who we are as a company, some of the things we're doing and looking at carbon reduction, the sort of the concept of smart cities, and then we'll start talking a little bit about rate design, customer prices, and what we're looking at going forward, and kind of our philosophy around those issues, because I think that's as important as kind of what the absolute numbers are. Please interrupt me if you have any questions as we go through the presentation, and I'm going to assume we have, including questions, right till about 7, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any hard, fast ending time, so.
Okay, so we'll move along. So in terms of who we are, PGE serves about half of the state of Oregon's population and about 3/4 of the commercial and industrial activity. Our largest customer, as you can imagine, is Intel in Hillsborough, as well as other large manufacturers. We've seen a tremendous change with the shift in the economy from basic industries and natural resources really to high technology and increasingly to services, so more software rather than hardware in our area. I think that some of the things that are really important about a utility that has not changed is that our work is dangerous. Many of my coworkers, Brooks coworkers, work in what we call our primary system, and people can be killed. Electricity is a dangerous product. We take safety very, very seriously. We have over 200 substations. We have over 40,000 miles of transmission lines, and it's really important that everyone who comes to work or comes in contact with PGE, transmission, distribution, knows that it's going to be safe. Whether that's a customer or whether that's an employee, it's a big deal for us and for our culture. The next is reliability. When I first met Mayor Gamba, we had a long conversation about his multi-day outage, the implications to his neighbor, who was elderly and who needed electricity really for her health care. And I think this is a really important aspect, is that many people rely on us not only for their livelihood in terms of their quality of life, but also for the jobs that they do. And that's very different than we saw, a decade ago, where multi-day outages, were tolerated, and they really are not anymore. The next is that about 20% of our customers struggle with affordability. They are trading off their utility bills for medicine for their parents, for clothing for their children, and it's really important that we don't forget that we equitably serve all customers as the regulated utility of the state.
How much again?
Pardon me? 20%. Okay. Yeah. Now, I have some more information on that and what we do for them, but it's increasingly a big deal in our society. We're one of the largest employers in Oregon. We feel very strongly about being at the center of our customers' lives. We spend a lot of time. We have a foundation that contributes, in combination with our employee giving campaign, about $3 million annually within the state of Oregon. And we also contribute about 45,000 volunteer hours. J.D. Power has us as one of the top utilities in the West for business customers. In terms of the work we're doing, let's see. There we go. In terms of the work we're doing with you all, I mentioned it's a terrific partnership. We have Electric Avenue going in place with 6 charging stations. This is the first that we've announced of 6. And you should also know that there are additional funds through the Volkswagen Electrify America program. Speaking with individuals with regards to electric cars, buses, if you take a look at, let's say, General Motors as an example, their view is 0 crashes, 0 emissions, and 0 congestion. And so we're really moving into a world where we'll see much more rideshare, electric vehicles, more automation, and more efficiency. We're really pleased also, we were just talking with Peter about our streetlight program. 116 smart streetlights will be going in, and the first 3 to be able to select from you already are getting requests by other mayors to come and take a look at what you're doing. I would like to recognize also the mayor for his is help with our green energy tariff. This will allow us to be able to supply you, other municipalities, with 100% green energy. And I think it's critical to us to be able to work with communities like yourselves who have the ability and the desire to move forward faster in a sustainable way, to move us faster as a utility as well. The other is that this is hard to do. And so it's really nice that we're able to partner and learn with entities that are interested in that. In terms of the changing landscape, I've mentioned safety is critical, reliability is critical, and affordability is critical. And today, being clean, sustainable, low carbon is essential, as is security, and then an equity piece. Security really gets at the concept of cybersecurity and physical security. I mentioned we have about 200 substations. We actually have, believe it or not, roughly our own police force. It's not large, but it's made up of a lot of former city police officers. Whether it's vandalism, the number of people we have doing cybersecurity, people are jiggling at our doorknobs all of the time trying to get in. On the carbon side, I'll speak a little bit more about that in the future, in a second, but it probably is the biggest distinguishing factor between now and even just 5 years ago. The call to a sustainable electric supply is very real and important that we meet it. Today, we are about 40% carbon free, moving to 80% in the next couple of decades. We've hired as a utility a company called Evolved Energy Research. It's the same group that the U.S. government worked with the United Nations to help us figure out really what does it take to decarbonize and how should we be looking at this problem from a societal standpoint. A lot of people ask us questions that are outside of our narrow field of electricity. And really what Evolved Energy Research said, it's the same information they largely gave to the UN at a very different scale. And that is that we need to be looking across the energy spectrum. So the energy spectrum in the United States is roughly about a $1.2 trillion spend per year. And today electricity makes up about 25% of it, 23%. We'll go to about 50% in the next couple of decades. And the reason for that is electricity, even today with our current 40% mix, is the cleanest form of energy that there is. It is 3 to 5 times more carbon efficient to burn electricity in a vehicle than our gasoline that we would have. So we have 3 pathways that I'll go through this. The first one is decarbonizing the electric supply. So essentially our 15 generating plants producing largely renewable energy, with the exception of when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, there are other reliability events, only then would we be using fossil fuels. So you're using fossil fuel energy as a backup to a renewable platform. You'll also see much more growth on the distributed side. One of the things that I think is really important here is that this is changing the economics of our business. No longer are you seeing sort of flat average costs because you're paying to burn something. The wind and the sun does not cost anything when it blows or when the sun shines, but you have much higher installed costs. So the economics of our business are shifting as a result of this. The next is really to empower our customers, clean energy choices. I think you all here would be a perfect example of a customer who is pushing us and also partnering with us as an example to others. What really is a smart grid? A smart grid is a bidirectional flow of electricity where we are using technology to optimize to the lowest usage levels and the lowest carbon impact levels across the system. So what we have seen at the utility scale, traditionally we would make power, we would transmit it over Bonneville Power Administration lines. We would take it to a substation, and then we would distribute it to homes and to businesses. And we're now seeing a much more interconnected, bidirectional set of flows. And that's pretty exciting if you really like these kinds of things. What allows it to be cost effective is the costs of technology is dropping and the cost of communications dropping. So for example, what we currently do today on renewables is we dispatch all of PGE's 15 generating plants on a 5-minute basis, controlled out of Folsom, California, in concert with all of the generating facilities from British Columbia to Arizona. And Idaho and British Columbia just joined a couple of months ago into this market. So if you think of that marginal cost of zero cost wind, zero cost solar, or maybe even has federal subsidies, so it's actually people will pay you to take that energy, that you will see plants in Arizona, other solar facilities where you have solar penetration of 35 to 40%, generating electricity that is used in Portland, Oregon, almost on an instantaneous basis as we curtail our production of, let's say, energy out of a gas plant or out of another thermal kind of a plant. So the same thing will happen in the springtime when we have larger hydro flows and runoff, and there may not be as much wind or solar in California or Arizona, Utah, other places. We will export power out of our operation. So what you'll see very clearly is that you'll see several peaks and valleys. So you'll see a big usage period in the morning when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. You'll see a big ramp up of solar in the middle of the day, largely out of California, Utah, Arizona, Nevada. Almost any thermal plant would be off. Big usage in the evening as all of a sudden the sun goes down. The wind tends to pick up in the evening, so you'll have a little bit more wind energy coming into the system. And the wind tends to blow most of the night. Usage tails off. We are an exporter of energy in the evening, and we're an importer during most of the daylight hours. And so that allows really for us to deliver renewable energy at the lowest cost. And I think that things like this, combined with the smart grid, allows for no longer utility to think of, is it renewable or cost effective? Renewable is cost effective as long as we're being smart with technology. So just a couple of years ago, we used to think about renewable energy as the most expensive source, and that paradigm is very much shifting. So any questions on that before I turn to sort of discussion on customer prices?
Well, it wasn't a question so much on what you said, but it was a question on something Peter sent us about some testing he's doing with you. And could you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I didn't quite understand that memo.
So actually we have, I think, a meeting on Thursday with the team from PGE. We're going to meet with Alma and a few other folks to talk about PGE's demand response test bed program. It's a pilot program. I think they're trying to gain some additional capacity in terms of I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. I think the resource plan says 77 megawatts, but the decarbonization plan talks about trying to get a much higher number. So
if you think about the picture I painted of heavy use in the morning, not a lot of solar energy, heavy use in the evening, you've got that transition from solar to the wind not yet blowing. If we can actually reduce usage with demand response during that period of time, let's say reduce the air conditioning in a building at 7 in the morning and let it pick back up at 9 in the morning through demand response, then that is less usage, that less dispatch of a fossil fuel plant. And so that's very effective for us and important for us to be able to work with organizations that are willing to do that. What we sometimes find is that particularly residences, they love to do it until they don't. And that reliability piece is critical because you have to have, the system has to balance at 60 hertz, we know that, and large-scale storage, if it's not behind a dam in terms of water, is still not technologically feasible at a big utility scale. And so being able to curtail demand is an important way that we manage the reliability of the system and allows us to do it with less use of fossil fuel generation.
So is what you're testing using like large institutional users, or is it anybody, and is it about pricing differences at different peak times?
So we are working on pricing differences. Right now, those are relatively modest. Some of the larger industrial usages, it's not possible given the kind of manufacturing that they have. It was much more possible with traditional industries, paper manufacturing, others. We curtailed them much more often because they could stop their paper machines, other things like that, than if you have ongoing silicon manufacturing. So as we move more to a high-tech economy, it gets harder. It actually gets harder to do, not easier.
But to add, if I could add on that, I think what we're looking at doing here in Milwaukie is looking at how we can do that with residential and commercial customers to some of their some of those loads that they can curtail like an electric water heater that you could shut off during the middle of the day.
The technology exists now where they can, I'm expecting, so correct me if I'm wrong, where they can actually control your air conditioning unit if you allow them to. And it takes a partnership. So what we're really trying to do, I believe, is target a certain substation, really see in one location with good public relations and good conversations and a dialogue around what we're trying to do as a city. If we can get enough people who want to participate, who want to test some of this out, help us figure out what works and what doesn't, and be sort of that test bed going forward so that Milwaukie can figure this out for the region, but also if it works for us in one substation location, move it to other locations of the
This
city.
happens in other parts of the country every day.
Yeah.
So this...
When I lived in California, I'm pretty sure that we were doing that kind of thing
Absolutely.
in the San Joaquin Valley.
Yep, you were. But your power prices were also about 2 to 3 times the cost.
Yeah, exactly. But it was, I got so used to it that, I don't do laundry in the middle of the day or run my dishwasher even yet, 20 years later.
Oh, I always do my laundry and my dishwasher at 11 or 12 at night when I go to bed. It's like I'm using off-peak.
Different pricing for that.
Yeah.
But do you, I understand that the world has moved to, you can control it from your phone when your air conditioning goes on and when you're, if you've got the right, appliances and the right connections. But you're saying not the individual doing it, but you guys doing it.
We do it. Company can do it.
And that's actually important because if you do it, we don't know how you're thinking. And if you're trying to balance a system, first of all, you have to be compliant with regulatory requirements to make sure there's no outages and things like that. But we have to make it work with the whole system. And that's why the interconnectivity for a utility is very important. Those are great questions.
So also, sorry, just before you go on, because everybody's at the table, I just want to give a little credit. So the EV chargers that we're getting that are going to go in across the street are a huge opportunity for the city. I really appreciated the excitement that PGE grew at the event when you announced it, and it was evidently a really momentous occasion for a lot of people sitting in the audience. So I appreciated that.
Oh, good.
We're also working with them on Soto, so we're looking at the lights along our new entryway and figuring out if there are ways that we can best utilize those so that we can create a great experience for our residents when they're utilizing that space, as well as figure out some new technologies. We're partnering on night sky compliant lights that you're going to see over the course of the next couple of months, actually. So it's more than just this one.
What I like about that, there's 116 of them, so you'll actually have enough scale to be able to see the difference.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we do pilots that are so small we can't measure it. And they'll be really nice.
And is that something we can capture with some photos now? Some kind of ambient light capture now and ambient light capture afterwards?
Yep.
I know a photographer, so I'll tell you somebody can do it.
He actually gets paid for that work.
And I would just add, add that this little brochure that we handed out kind of highlights all of the different things that we're doing with you guys currently. A few of them, including the test bed, are pending PUC approval, but it does outline all the things that we currently have or intend to do with you guys.
And is this just for us?
Yeah, I hadn't really.
Can we give this, we need these at our farmer's market.
Yeah, I didn't even bother opening because I didn't realize it was tailored to Milwaukee. So knowing that, I find it much more interesting.
Yeah.
So yes, I agree. Those should be at the farmer's market.
Okay, so I'll move on to customer prices. So this just gives you a look. This slide actually comes from the Oregon Public Utility Commission, and what you see is Idaho Power slide, which is another utility in Oregon, on the east side of the state, bumping up into Idaho, obviously. You have Pacificor in the next line, and then PGE is in the yellow. And what we have seen since 2007, or over about the last 10 years, is that our prices have gone up about 2% on average. We recognize that we sell something that while we think it's really cool, most people see it as just enabling their life. It's a commodity, and really being conscious of price increases is very important. One of the things I want to emphasize is we have, and I think a couple of people spoke to you about a year ago around our different customers. We segment our customer prices into different categories. A first category would be residential customers and small business. Those are our most expensive customers to serve. And that's because they take the smallest quantity, they have the most irregularity, and so they use the most of our system. They use all of the management pieces, they use the substation, they use the poles and wires. The poles and wires sometimes fall down, which is why we're so pleased you're undergrounding so much of your poles and wires when you do your redevelopment in your inner core. And so we allocate costs. We're a cost-based system. We allocate costs to those who use them. And then if you keep on marching down to the largest, your largest industrial customers buy the same amount of power 24/7, 7 days a week, no fluctuations, and they never touch a distribution system. There's never a truck that has to roll. There's never a substation involved. They take power what we call the transmission level, either right off of our transmission lines or right off of Bonneville Power transmission lines. And so they don't pay for that distribution system. And so they're paying for their costs, but they're not paying for residential customer costs. And we have pretty extensive cost studies that sort of allocate the costs and build them up depending on usage, and we look at national standards on these things as well. So any questions on how we do rate design? Because I think sometimes people think that we are under Oregon law, we don't subsidize one customer class for another. We try and go right down the fairway equitably.
So each one pays basically for the actual services and equipment that they would utilize.
Exactly.
Right?
So your large industrial customers are not subsidizing or being subsidized for residential customers in this area. There are some jurisdictions, let's say some areas in Canada, where large industrial customers will pay bigger bills, and the residences, which generally are in small communities, and the employees of those large industrial customers would pay less. We don't do that in Oregon, and we don't do that in most states in the country.
How about the buy-in? At least I know it occurs by residential because I do it, to renewable energy.
Yes.
And so do businesses do they do that also, and therefore they pay for that like a residential customer does?
They absolutely have that opportunity, and some do and some do not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, that gets to another point that I'll make is that some of our large industrial customers can opt out of the PGE system and buy direct from the market. And the issue of that marginal cost, average cost issue, and not, they're buying a commodity, but they're not necessarily buying reliability. Most of those, all but one, do not buy green energy. So when they move off of our system, they're almost always moving off of our system to try and capture a low market price. And they tend to be the more credit-worthy, larger customers.
Do any of them at this point have cogeneration plants, and then you purchase back from them what they don't utilize?
We used to, and that was a very traditional model that we had that worked really well with particularly paper manufacturers. So the largest would have been the Newburgh facility that is closed now. We don't have as much of that anymore. It's very de minimis.
Yeah, the one I was more familiar with in California was Armstrong Pirelli tire.
Yes,
with their own cogeneration plant.
I bet they probably burned tires, quite frankly. Yeah. And they used to burn tires at the Newburgh paper facility too, which I'm not exactly sure how that worked environmentally, but that's another topic.
They actually they utilized a different source, but they shipped their bad tires away. Yeah. So they were good.
I hear you. So in terms of, this gives you a little bit of a sense of what we do for customers to help them with bill pay. So we've just put in a new customer information system. It takes the information all the way electronically from the automated meters. We don't have people driving out to people's homes reading meters anymore. We haven't for almost a decade. It all that information leaves your homes and businesses automatically. People can choose when they pay their bill. They can try and match it to things come in. We also have levelized pay. And then we have a number of programs that we work to try and alleviate the issues for those who are the most in need. One of the things we also have is we have a direct portal to federal and state agencies, so that if you are a customer who needs help with bill assistance, you can get in the queue and access that money very, very quickly through the portals that we've built to try and reduce the friction in the system and also lower administrative costs. So this just gives you a little bit of a trend, and I've talked to Mayor Gamber a little bit about this, but you can see your energy deliveries since 2015, are pretty flat. And if you were to go back another decade, I think you'd see exactly the same thing, if not actually a little bit slightly downward sloping lines. Our new connects are up significantly. I don't know if you realize this, but our general geographic area has more cranes per capita than any city in the country today. So we have explosive growth that's taking place. And yet you can see the residential usage per customer is also on a straight downward trend. And so it's, as we look at this, we sell, most of our bills are on a per kilowatt basis. And so as we look at keeping customer bills low, we look at the per kilowatt charge, but we also look at the total customer bill charge. And that's why we're sensitive to people moving off of the system and paying for the commodity, but not paying for the reliability and all of that goes into maintaining the system. So that just gives you a sense of what's happening, sort of the macroeconomic standpoint for our business. So with that, I think I'm right at the hour. And I just want to reiterate that we're focused on being clean, connected through that smart grid, deploying technology, equitable, affordable, and accessible to all. PGE has been part of the community for 127 years. We expect to be around for another 127 years. We're going through rapid change technologically. We are moving our workforce pretty significantly. We have the advantage right now of a lot of retirements and are hiring in very different kinds of people who are using technology in different ways to be able to lower costs and deliver sustainable value. So with that, I can take any other questions. And I know you've already been here for a long time and we're at the end of your meeting.
Oh, no.
This is really fast.
Oh, really? It's a short meeting compared to many.
To be last on your agenda at 7 p.m. I was like, oh, dear.
That would be unusual if it was a regular meeting.
I have a question about one of your slides. I didn't want to interrupt you at the time because I wasn't sure how long we would go, but there was the one where you said this is the traditional way we did energy, And then there was this, that one. So what's the sensing devices with two-way interaction? Are you saying that the device says I don't need?
So the sensing devices are in the they're different places. So you can have a meter that's reading energy flows going into the home and going out. So it's very simplistic. You can think of turning it back, your meter. The other is that you'll have in a substation, you'll have automation that will allow for two-way directional flow.
I don't understand.
So
different than what I don't know what that means.
Right now, so think about cars on a highway, and think about the sophistication of having cars being on the same lane, driving in opposite directions and not hitting one another.
Okay.
And if you can do that on your highway, then you actually don't need southbound and northbound lanes. You only need one set of lanes because it's all moving in a smart direction. Is that helpful? It sounds easier, and you can see all of the different devices. Actually, on the top of a streetlight, you'll have sensing devices as well, and that the sensing devices will sense when people are actually needing to use the lights and when they're not.
Okay.
So then you would curtail, like slowing your car on that highway down.
Okay, thank you.
What's happening is the technology is low cost enough that we can operate in an interoperability way at a granular level that before we had to do it at the utilities. We had to do it at the 100, 200 megawatt level. We now can measure things and are precise enough that we can come down to this next level, meaning that we really don't have to overbuild the system like our predecessors did. The way we got reliability traditionally in a utility was we invested dollars and we had extra. We could turn the plant on because it always had 20% extra capacity. We could turn it down when we wanted to. We could, so we had extra. We had extra transmission back to California and other places like that. As we build less and we utilize more, we have to be smarter about how we do all those things.
Okay.
So one thing that maybe is not going to change at all, because it's maybe just a factor of the nature of the beast of electricity, but you commented on how great it was that we're going to bury our lines downtown as we have redevelopment. And I grew up in an area that the lines were all buried. I grew up in Oklahoma. There were a lot of windstorms and stuff.
I was going to say, you didn't grow up in Oregon then.
No. I grew up in
we didn't bury any lines.
Yeah, no, by the 1960s, all lines were being buried in Oklahoma. So I grew up in a place that didn't have lines, except in the really old neighborhoods. But so the cost of that burying is really expensive. I mean, we've heard a lot about that over the years in terms of our downtown. Is there any, because it has to be so deep and it has to be so well protected and all of that, is there any kind of breakthrough on the horizon that will make that less expensive?
No, but the way to do it is in as cost-effective a way as possible, and really this is, I think, a question probably for Peter and for Ian and others, is when you're already tearing up your system, be smart and bury your lines at that time. Also, put in as much fiber as you can at that time. So really plan for the system for the long term. The challenge that we have in some jurisdictions is that how we, and you know this far better than I do, how we tax and raise revenue for schools and roads and others leads us to fairly high system development charges in Oregon. And so many of the developers say, wow, I'm already getting this huge burden, and so I want to be cheap on everything else when it comes to utilities and whatnot. And that makes sense for them because after the homes are sold, the apartments are built, they're out of there. And the life cycle costs of outages, putting it back up, whatnot, I promise you, you will be dollars ahead by having your lines underground. But But a developer isn't looking at life cycle costs. They're looking at what is the end product price I'm going to be selling that housing unit for. So it's a constant debate that we have.
Thank you.
But so the economics of that is you're talking about two different pockets.
Yes.
Right? So when the developer comes in, they build something, and as you pointed out, then they leave, and it's there, and if the power lines fall down, not their problem. However, it's your problem. And
it is, and then
the money that comes out of your pockets,
Yep.
and then, again, back to the taxpayers eventually.
And it leads to bad satisfaction. I mean, it's just a bad.
So has there been any thought at the PUC level, at, back and forth between you guys and state entities, about making an investment in starting to bury more lines, like spending that money that we're going to spend in 5 years when the wind blows now to bury things? Is that any kind of a process started around
We've had more
that?
conversations. So again, back to sort of utility rate design discussion. We're not able to say we would have to have a different way of looking at things, and I think we would need to have mayors like yourself all come together and say, this is something we'd like to do, because you're getting into, I'm asking people to pay today, and am I subsidizing for tomorrow or not? And you'll have large industrial customers say, no, I'm not going to do that. You get into whose pocket is it coming out of, and then you get into can we do it, or are you creating a subsidy issue? So it's actually hard to do. The other is that, believe it or not, but many jurisdictions are significantly conflicted on this, because they want the development, so they want things to be lower cost, and they want the system development charges that go into their stuff. So there's a trade-off on this. You'd be amazed at how many jurisdictions don't want to stay away from this topic rather than wait.
Yeah, people love to ignore reality, but I think we're going to be seeing more and more violent storms in the coming years, and it's just going to get more and more expensive, and the more we can forestall that.
And then we also have the competing goal of wanting to have more tree canopy, right? And so,
and the more, I will promise you, trees and power lines staying up is not a good combination.
Those are not.
Well, I don't have any other questions. I just want to say we are so excited that you guys are partnering with us, and I think it's fantastic. And thanks to Mayor Gamba for his leadership on this, and for you picking us, and because we're here, we're open for business on this. We love it. So please keep us in mind in the future for other things too.
Well, thank you. You not only with regards to the topics that Ann was talking about, and Mayor Gamba's leadership at the PUC and in the legislature and others, but I would also say that in working with Peter, when we have an issue, and it's a permitting issue, it's a work right-of-way issue, it gets solved really quickly. And when your costs are in your labor and you've got a supply chain behind it, being able to work with you all is so much more efficient and effective for our people. It lowers our cost not having to get into overtime, because we can plan, we get the permit. It's a real pleasure, so thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks to Peter.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming in, and we appreciate that. We look forward to more and more.
Thanks. Can we take a break?
We do have a bunch of these.
Yes.
Get more.
And then the other ones that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we should do it.
Can we take a break?
Rotary.
Sure. Well,
we still have this, but I don't know how long this will go. So.
Yeah, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Oh, good.
Okay.
We were.
as much of a percentage of it, so maybe he's only part-time or something, I don't know.
Back in the day, the editors wrote very little.
Oh, yeah.
They edited.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, they used to have a
Actual staff of writers. All righty, so we are back on air, and we have the last item of the evening, which is the carbon divestment letter to the state of Oregon.
And then we have
Young lady.
about 10 years. Ready.
Hello.
Hi,
So presented for you was more information than anything, and it basically summarizes what I've been asked to bring forward as a statement that would direct or ask the state to make our investments consistent with our values of climate action. So within this, the research that I've done, the basis, the benchmark for that would be to use the fossil-free index's list of carbon underground 200 companies. That list was not attached as there's publication requirements to that, so it's by reference only and we could look it up. So I've drafted a letter for your consideration. At this point, there have been, as you've seen references, several other jurisdictions that have made this ask, and at this point, the state has not made any indication that it has any interest to. The feasibility of how to do this would be difficult, especially given the primary reasons of investments is security and to diversify across the board. So again, we've made the statement, the recommendation here is just to start the conversation by making the statement to the state and using these as benchmarks, but I wasn't sure about the council's level of investment in this issue and how much more, if this statement is how we'd like to proceed, if we'd like to do that in conjuncture. So the statement is based off the vision that we have currently, but we could also do it in conjunction with, amend it to add in our commitment to the action plan when it's actually adopted, or do additional research. So I wanted to come to you guys to start the discussion on what level of interest you had in the statement, and additional work that you'd like done.
Everybody understands the basic concept of divestment, yes? Okay.
So attachment 4, that's Oregon Short-Term Fund Holdings, asset backed. Those are ones that are on this 200 list, or these are?
No, this is just all the holdings.
All the holdings.
This is the current
So actually, as the list isn't published publicly, of the ones that were there, there's very few direct holdings of energies on the list. So the actual impact is not I have not been able to calculate it this time.
So I sort of see this as a spectrum and kind of an ongoing process, like several of the other municipalities, and I think there's a couple of counties. Also, I was looking for that list, but I can't find it.
I don't remember seeing that.
They've put in an ask to the state, please divest. Wheeler at some point was sort of considering it. Now, obviously, he's not.
Why, obviously, he's not?
Well, because he's not the treasurer anymore.
No longer treasurer.
Oh. I thought you meant it as mayor.
No.
Reading a letter.
Okay,
I
yeah.
was confused about.
Oh, sorry. He was considering actually doing it. The current treasurer is not considering actually doing it. So to some degree, this is fire one for effect a little bit, and it's just adding our names to the list. I think the next step would be probably to have a conversation with all of those entities to say, what do we think about, amongst all of us, forming some investment group that would then, we would pull our money out of the state fund and create our own investment group that could then control how we were invested. And I think there's some potential for that based on casual conversations I've had.
Is the list that long?
Of
people who've asked for this already?
It's pretty big.
Yeah.
I mean, so I believe it's Portland, Multnomah County, Eugene. I was trying to find the list.
And I
Ashland.
didn't compile all of them. I gave examples, and the link I sent actually had it.
If you add up
the
funds from all the entities that have asked for it, it's significant. So it could be, and just mere threat of that might be enough to get the treasurer off the dime.
I mean, has Portland or any of the bigger fish indicated an interest in, like, spearheading that kind of a conversation?
I probably shouldn't speak for Portland. Let's put it that way.
Well, don't say who, just somebody has indicated.
I've had conversations with specific individuals.
Yeah. Because, I mean, obviously that's not something we're going to lead.
No, we're not going to lead.
Milwaukie.
But we could be part of. So I think, if this is something that people had done 20 years ago and been serious about, we would be in a very different situation right now. And so he sort of begs the question of, okay, so when are we going to do this? When are we going to send the message to the carbon industry that we're done investing in them? So in any case, this is just, like I said, the first step. I would imagine that we would do this letter in conjunction with a resolution. And we could either wait until our full climate action plan is ready to roll out, or we could do this as an early measure. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other about it. And I think as to the letter, the other piece that I wanted to get in there, and I was trying to do some research today and just kept getting pulled away from it. But there's an awful lot of people in the investment world that are beginning to say that maybe some of those investments aren't just straight up good investments anymore, because the writing's on the wall. There's going to be a tail off, and there's going to be a lot of stranded assets. And they're starting to really...
Well, I mean, that's definitely already clear in coal, right?
Right. Coal is right now a very bad investment. And as we see the electrification of the transportation system picking up, I think that will also be the case for petroleum. And they are so far out on their investments with exploration and developing new fields and things that I think it's a dangerous investment right now, frankly. That's so when we do the letter, I would like to
have
a resolution in addition, but have a paragraph in there that talks about the sheer unadvisability, perhaps, of investment in fossil fuels in the not too distant future. But there's obviously needs to be some research on that and pull some things up from some of the investment firms and some of the I think it was Forbes. I read an article in Forbes that talked about it. But again, I couldn't find any of that stuff today when I was looking for it.
So Haley, let me make sure I understood what you said before. So the letter says to review and consider divestment of directly held or commingled assets that include holding in fossil fuel companies. So you're saying the directly held is pretty small pool. That's not a huge ask, but the commingled assets
is where, because if you looked at the list, it's a lot of banks and other things that hold those. And so that's where it gets much more complicated as far as the feasibility of this and how far do you take it. And there are definitely, if you look, there are definitely funds where they could decide to direct their money to those funds that directly say they won't invest in those things, and they could have impacts that way. But again, they're balancing the safety, the liquidity, and protecting that primary balance. So the diversification at this point, like I said, has not been fully researched of how you do that.
And so the money that we have, this local government investment pool, that's just kind of like our budget reserves and stuff that we have there, or what is that?
So we have commingled cash. So actually all of our cash from a bank account perspective is commingled. Mm-hmm. So we have a checking account that we manage for time deposit for that we keep at about an $800,000 level, and then the balance of our investments, the balance of our cash is held in the local investment pool. With the bond proceeds that we actually just closed on this morning, we'll potentially be looking at having some other treasuries directly held, but because we will be closer, we need to make sure we don't hit the limit of the local investment pool. But I mean, it's anywhere from, so the limit right now is over 48 million. And with the bond proceeds, we will be above that, or are above that. So right now they're held in our account at US Bank while we look at that, and we can directly control that. But so we have currently a little over 30 million in the local investment pool from just a cash flow perspective.
Wow, okay. And then it's also PERS everybody for.
So again, PERS is a much bigger statement, but with this letter, we would be encouraged, the Oregon Investment Council oversees all of those investments. So that's kind of where I was trying to show in the attachment 3, it shows the different funds. So of the 100 billion that the OIC oversees, 17, almost 18 of that is in the Oregon Short-Term Fund, which is the LGIP. But the PERS accounts are 76 billion of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In the letter, the second to last paragraph, when it says, for purposes of this request, fossil fuel companies defined as, et cetera, is that something that we've created, or is that something that these other cities and municipalities have also defined it of the same structure? So
everyone I could reference, that is the basic benchmark for what they consider a carbon company.
That's the 200 biggest.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's independently generated by the Fossil Fuel Indexes, which is a nonprofit organization.
So, for example, when we listed Ashland, Eugene, and others, they would be working under that same list?
The recommendations I looked at, they did, they were all using this as their benchmark.
And so has anybody done any, I mean, we already know we're facing a PERS deficit. So has anybody done any analysis of what this means for that, or?
So again, that's where the feasibility of the diversification, and again, I just pulled the Oregon Short-Term Fund because that's more of where the funds that we're talking about from our direct implication. But I don't know what the holdings are there, and so again, the direct impact of, since none of these pools have made that big leap of how that would be feasible or what that meant for that security. That's, I think, where your risk lies.
New York would probably be the one to watch right now. Yep. They're moving the most aggressively on this. I think they're divesting $5 billion currently. I don't know. Something like that.
I mean, I know several universities, big universities have, and I was thinking, I mean, if I'd had more time, I would have liked to have researched sort of the effect of divestment policies. I mean, the one that comes to mind from my youth is the apartheid, the South Africa divestment policies, and what role did they play and what happened there, I'd like to know more about that.
So again, with this concept is we can come back with more information, and we could bring that in conjuncture with the climate action plan, or I don't know if you're looking to start the conversation and get connected with those other entities by sending the letter to make the statement to start.
What do we think about including language, just as, I mean, it would only take a sentence or two if we can know all of the, and not have to list them all, but if we can know all of the other entities in Oregon that have made this request, we wouldn't have to make the threat, but simply listing, but simply by saying we know that 51%.
We
join the 51% of
Oregon,
or whatever it is,
or whatever percentage of the population they represent.
Right.
I like that.
Right.
That's
I like
actually
that.
really good.
It's a very veiled threat.
Yeah.
I like that. That's good.
Use your mic. Sorry.
Do we know if the Oregon Investment Council has sent direct responses to any of these other entities saying, thanks for the request, but no thanks, or do they even respond? Or are you aware of it?
I believe they
Don't know.
do some sort of response generically, but I haven't seen one, so I don't know for
I
sure.
haven't either.
I could inquire with those entities. So again, I pulled the compiled list from other resources like 350 PDX and whatnot, and didn't contact these directly. So I could see what kind of statements they did or didn't receive back. I did specifically, was at a financial conference about a year ago where Tobias Reed, the current treasurer, was at, and this question was asked, and he basically
Tap danced.
made a comment about being active investors. And as an investor in these companies trying to influence them, as I think the gist of where he went with this, rather than making any implication that they would consider actually pulling funds. So again, whether or not that's changed or any update on whether or not the state has taken as far as I know, they haven't taken a position, but that they have, I assume there was some sort of response to these entities, but I don't know exactly what that was.
So as to your question you asked earlier, if you were to, a big push of Bill McKibben's and 350 is 350.org has been divestment. So they're probably they probably got the most information. The main 350.org organization, not PDX necessarily, although there's some people at PDX that have some good information, but
And do you think they're keeping a statewide list?
they're keeping a tally.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely keeping a tally of, I don't know if PDX is keeping a tally of the state. I know McKibben's keeping a tally of the country.
So, and that's the list that I actually put the link in the staff report. There's a link to the 350.org list that you can search. It's a little hard, like I searched for Oregon and whatnot, and it's you can't get a complete listing from what I could tell, because when I searched just Oregon, very little came up. So, but like Metro or other ones I knew weren't there, but if I searched Metro Oregon, then it came up, or like City of Portland, you had to write City of Portland or something. So it was hard to get from that list, get a compiled list of everybody in Oregon. I did speak to someone at 350 to pdx.org, but again, as far as them having a running tally and having the totals, I wasn't able to get that out of them. So I don't know if it's readily available.
Well, that's going to be more staff work to figure that out. I mean, I like the concept of saying we join the other 26 jurisdictions or whatever, or the population, but if you're saying it's not, unless you have another access to some other list that is Oregon specific.
I should be able to get that information.
See, we could just send some more inquiries to specifically ask for that to see if they've calculated that rather than us try to do that. But I don't know that it's readily available.
And I would be curious if we can find a response from, because what I suspect they may say something like, well, per state law, as a fiduciary, we just can't do this, sort of thing. I don't know what they'll say, but if it meant that was going to reduce the returns, as you just said, feasibility of it, they're not going to. I mean, I'm not against sending them the letter, but they may be under constraints that they couldn't do it without a change in law. I don't know, but if you're talking about reducing the rate of return, they do have a responsibility to get the biggest rate of return.
Right, but their rate of return isn't that impressive anyway.
Well,
It can get worse.
yeah.
Sure, it could get better too.
Well, and it may not even just be state law. There may be ERISA, there may be other fiduciary duty kind of things in there. That's an interesting.
And these were a lot of the complications of the feasibility of it.
So I'm actually just going to interrupt because we're about 30 minutes over for tonight. We do have 2 executive sessions. Haley's been working on this, I think, for a year, which I've really appreciated. We've had to move it off and on just to make some space. But how would you guys like us to proceed? Mark and I, Mayor, and I met a year ago to start this conversation, and it really was, in order to go down the path ourselves, it was cost prohibitive. It was just too much. But this was a step for you to make a policy statement to the region, and it's one where I think you have a lot of support from other regional partners to be able to make the statement and to say, we'd like you to think about this and try and figure it out. I think that the letter is in good stead with other communities that you work with often. The question, I guess, is if we put this on in a few weeks with a resolution that says, we're doing this in collaboration with these other organizations, and we come up with a paragraph if we can find the information, is that sufficient for this initial step?
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay. Then let's plan on that, and we'll come back to you probably in early September, just because August is now booked. And we'll make sure that we get something quickly.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Get the list of the others, or best we can.
Yes. Yeah.
And any response that we've been able to get.
Yeah, so we know what kind of group we're entering.
And just based on sort of the mixed conversation here, I'm going to limit Haley to an hour of trying to find other communities and sort of balance that out. And if we can, we'll create something. If we can't, we won't. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, even if we can only choose a few large examples, I think that would illustrate the point.
Yeah, if you can get Portland and Eugene and a couple others, you've got a huge percentage of the state anyway.
Right.
Okay. Upon adjournment of the study session, council will meet in executive session pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute ORS 192.6602E to deliberate with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions, and H, to consult with counsel concerning legal rights and duties regarding current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.